As I mentioned, last Thursday was Earth Day, and every year since 1970, April 22nd has been observed as Earth Day. And of course, it's a global event dedicated to demonstrating support for the environment. And Earth Day 2021 happens to mark the 51st anniversary of Earth Day. I think you might enjoy watching this short but informative video on the history of Earth Day. This video is actually from last year's Earth Day, and I think I showed it at the, I guess it wouldn't have been in the Hondo, but maybe in a talk I gave somewhere last year for last year's Earth Day. But nonetheless, it's just as appropriate today, if not more so. So let me show you this, share with you this video.
To help clean up this beach that I grew up at. It's the best.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. I certainly enjoyed the music. It was, kind of a danceable kind of thing, really, really catchy. I hope I don't get a copyright claim on that from Facebook. But if you'd like to get involved with, the organization Earth Day, earthday.org, go to their website, earthday.org. And you'll find a lot of opportunities to get involved. But in terms of what's new for Earth Day 2021, while of course the crises of climate change and environmental pollution and so forth have no doubt gotten more dire in the past year, I think that one significant ray of hope is that Americans have elected much more earth-friendly administration, if you will, in Washington, and which, as of February of this year, enacted an executive order that the U.S. has officially, the U.S. officially rejoins the Paris Climate Agreement that you saw mentioned in the video there, and so that's really, I think, an encouraging sign. Now I'd like to discuss a little bit about the connection between Earth Day, excuse me, and our Buddhist teachings. And, not surprising, I think there is a very strong connection. Let me begin by first by sharing the ideas of one of the well-known teachers of what is known as engaged Buddhism. This is the Buddhist scholar and Zen teacher, David Loy. Let me share a quote of his with you. As we start to wake up and realize that we are not separate from each other, nor from this wondrous earth, we also begin to realize that the ways we live together and the ways we relate to the earth need to be reconstructed. That not only includes social engagement, but finding ways to address the problematic economic and political structures, the institutionalized forms of greed, ill will, and delusion that are deeply implicated in the eco crisis. His statement that we are not separate from each other or from the earth are, of course, key Buddhist teachings, which I will discuss more a little bit later, but also his mentioning the problematic economic and political structures, I think echoes what other environmental activists, such as the 18-year-old Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, you also saw in the video, that these activists have also said. But also, says David Loy, in Buddhism, there's already, you could say, a model for the social engagement that he's calling for. And what is this model? It's the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is the Mahayana ideal of the sattva, or being, with the mind of Bodhi, or the mind of awakening. This is the Bodhisattva is the sentient being dedicated to work for the benefit of all beings. And to again quote David Loy in this next quote, he clarifies, I think, the Buddhist wisdom that drives the action of the Bodhisattva. Let me share this second quote with you. Ultimately, if there is anything special that Buddhism has to offer in the face of our current extinction crisis, it must be rooted in its capacity to help us see through the illusion of separate selves. The truth of interdependence reminds us that we're all in this together. The truth of impermanence helps us look at extinction unflinchingly. Buddhism can offer us a framework for first understanding and then acting on our current situation. Actually, in the details of Shakyamuni Buddha's own awakening, the historical Buddha's own awakening 2,500 years ago, I think there's an interesting story about how he himself came to realize the need to work for the benefit of all beings. So, yes, when the Buddha attained awakening, he became the Buddha, the awakened one. However, this particular story sheds light on the Buddha's realizing, in a sense, that his awakening was not truly fulfilled until he began his compassionate work to share the Dharma with others. The story is from a talk I heard Dr. Nobuo Haneda give a few years ago. And this story says that after the Buddha had attained awakening at the age of 35, there was a period of 49 days during which he deeply pondered the question of what should he do, so to speak, with the insight that he had observed, or discovered rather. And this insight was, of course, of singular importance. The Buddha attained what is referred to as the state of nirvana, the state where, liberated from the illusion of a separate self, the illusion of a separate self, of the illusion of the ego self, which had actually been the cause of his suffering all along. When he was liberated from that, he was now experiencing supreme bliss, the supreme bliss of nirvana. But the story says that if he was so happy, why did the Buddha get up? Why did the Buddha leave his meditation and begin to share this insight into the problem of the ego self for the benefit of others? Well, he did share the Dharma because, as Dr. Netta put it, it could be said that the Buddha's original insight had deepened. He had realized that the self he thought was permanent was, like everything else, actually impermanent, and was therefore an illusion. And then he was able to let go of his self-attachment. But he also began to realize the deeper reason for the self's impermanence. What is the reason? What causes the self to actually be impermanent and not permanent? Well, besides the fact that everything outside of him was in constant change, the Buddha realized that everything inside him, including his own mind, his own self-identity, was also constantly changing. It was constantly changing due to its changing causes and conditions. In a sense, the Buddha saw that a self does exist, but in reality, the self actually consists of myriad causes and conditions. The self doesn't really belong to me, and actually, the self arises because of countless other selves. In other words, we are who we are in this moment because of our parents, because of our ancestors, going back countless generations, because of what happened to us this morning, and of course, because of all the resources of the earth that sustain our lives. This is, I think you know, the Buddha's teaching of interdependence, that all the lives that we interact with from moment to moment each day affect us, perhaps greatly or perhaps only infinitesimally, but they do affect us nonetheless. And so because of his deep understanding, not only of impermanence, but also of the interdependence of all life, the Buddha got up, went out into the world, and shared the Dharma with countless people for 45 years, up until the very last day of his life at the age of 80. And so in those 49 days, he realized the deeper meaning in his awakening insight, that because we are all interconnected in this flow of impermanence, each of us is a manifestation of myriad other selves. Each of us is a manifestation of each other. We are all together in this universal truth. We are not separate, disconnected selves. And therefore, from the awakened view of the Buddha, all life is one. But then, what is the actual significance of the Buddha's teaching of the interdependence and interconnectedness of all life for us personally? What does this mean in terms of our own awakening? And I think in this regard, I recall a really memorable statement by one of the great scholars and teachers of Shin Buddhism, and also one of the great teachers of engaged Buddhism. This is the late Dr. Alfred Bloom. Let me show a slide here of his quote here. Dr. Bloom had said, "Unless one practices Buddhism with the intention of benefiting others, they cannot fulfill their own awakening." Well, what does Dr. Bloom's statement mean? Does it mean that, for instance, does it mean that as long as we consciously practice Buddhism with the intent of benefiting others, then we will, automatically fulfill our own awakening? I don't think that's what it means. I mean, if that was the case, then it would mean, for example, that if let's say I'm in a grocery store, and I'm consciously choosing products with the words eco-friendly, or sustainably farmed on them, then that these choices that I'm making are also helping me fulfill my own awakening. Well, clearly, this is not how it works, right? I mean, it's a good thing to make informed choices as consumers, of course, but I think if we think we're closer to awakening, then this kind of thinking is probably more like the antithesis of what Dr. Bloom is referring to. I think that the intent to benefit others that he's referring to only arises in us not because of any conscious decision we make to do the right thing. It arises because we gain insight into the truth of the way things really are. which is that all life, including ourselves, is both impermanent and interdependent. And I would say, and I think Dr. Aneta was saying, that this is exactly the same transformative insight that Shakyamuni Buddha realized in those 49 days, and that led him to be, according to Dr. Aneta, both a Buddha and a Bodhisattva. So if we deeply hear, if we deeply understand, and therefore are transformed by this essential Buddhist truth, then we will naturally be moved to work for the benefit of others. I think with this clarification, I hope that Dr. Bloom's statement, his statement that unless one practices Buddhism with the intention of benefiting others, they cannot fulfill their own awakening. I hope that with this clarification, that statement now makes more sense. I think he's saying that what awakening really is actually the arising within us of the wish to work for the awakening of others, to dedicate ourselves to be of benefit to others. This intention to benefit others is absolutely essential for our own awakening. In fact, this is our awakening. Well, before I conclude, I want to add that while attaining enlightenment or awakening is, of course, the primary issue in Buddhism, in some Buddhist traditions, including I think our Shin Buddhist tradition, there often seems to be a question about whether or not we should be actively engaged in other issues such as environmental issues and social justice issues. Of course, in my talk, I shared I think the powerful ideas of my teachers like Dr. Netta and Dr. Bloom. And so you may not agree, but I think that what they are saying is that if we have to ask whether or not we should be actively engaged, then we probably shouldn't do it. And regarding this topic of engagement, I think some of you also may have participated in our recent introducing our temple and teaching seminar, which it was about 10 days ago. And I think that the presenter, Greg Elliot, who's one of our Dharma seeds, one of our lay leaders, expressed his own engagement with the issue of social justice and the need to speak out against systemic racism and xenophobia of all kinds. And so now, for that surprise that I mentioned, let me see if Greg is here and can join us. Let's see here. Okay, so Greg, are you there? Oh, can you unmute? Oh, let me see. Oh, once again, are you there, Greg?
I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay, there's Greg. Thank you very much for joining us. So we're live on Facebook right now.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, he said hello, everyone. So let's see. So I wonder if I could ask Greg about his impressions of the introducing our temple and teachings. Oh, go ahead.
Well, you and I had a brief discussion about this, about what the introduction should entail, and I had expressed apparently a rather strong opinion that I thought it should entail at least a bit of engaged Buddhism. You have mentioned Dr. Bloom and others. I mentioned in the talk, I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, who said all Buddhism is engaged Buddhism. If it's not, it's not Buddhism, and which seems to be what Dr. Bloom is saying in different words. That we need to, we've had this discussion before, that a lot of people's perception of Buddhism and Buddhists, and perhaps a lot of Buddhists' perception of Buddhism and Buddhists, is looking inward. dealing with the self, realizing the non-self, realizing the interconnectedness, and working to control our own passions and our own working against our own greed, our own ignorance, our own etc. And that looking inward can be seen as the opposite of being engaged. And as Dr. Bloom said, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, as others said, I think the opposite is true, that we can do both. We can inwardly look at our sources of anger and greed and the other things that we as Buddhists are supposed to disengage from, but we can engage with the world around us. Um, and Again, I think, especially in the world as it exists now, as we become more aware of, we went through the Me Too movement and became more aware as a society of the needs of, especially of women in workforces where they were preyed upon, at the risk of sounding dramatic. We now have Black Lives Matter, and the awareness that, even during the trial of the officer that murdered George Floyd, that 3 or 4 other blacks were shot by police during that trial. The awareness that these things need to change, and that we as Buddhists can work to affect that change is where I would like to see us as Buddhists, the direction that I would like to see us as Buddhists move into.
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg. I think there was a little bit of echoing in when you're speaking there a little bit earlier, and which I think is now corrected. My wife came out and said he's echoing, but I've corrected that. But yeah, thank you very much for that. That your comments. I think it's, and I think what's really sort of really head turning, I guess you'd say, about Dr. Bloom's statement is that unless we have this intention to work for the benefit of others, we can't actually attain our own benefit, our own awakening. And I think this is something that I think was sort of highlighted in Dr. David Matsumoto's presentation yesterday. He brought in a lot of Mahayana ideas, and one of the key ideas is this idea of interdependence on many levels. And one of the levels is that because we're all, our lives are all interdependent and related and actually interlinked or interconnected, then, from the standpoint of Mahayana Buddhism, the question is, can you really only work for your own awakening without, and sort of ignoring or putting aside others' awakening? And so what Dr. Bloom's statement is very much in the core of Mahayana teachings, which is that you really can't separate the two. Really, this idea of wisdom and compassion, the wisdom of my self-awakening and receiving the Buddha's wisdom, and then the wisdom of the compassion of then being sort of inspired to work for the benefit of others, are not separate. They can basically only happen sort of simultaneously. And I think this is what Dr. Bloom is saying. And so, it's not saying that, you or anyone or myself has to be engaged. I think what it's saying is that, as you are pointing out, is that if we're really actually listening to the teaching, this engagement should come naturally.
I'm reminded that the Dhammakara's 48 vows are largely about the benefit of others. If other people can't attain Buddhism, then I can't either. I mean, it's really about the benefit of others on his way to becoming a Mida. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think one of the in at least in my understanding of Mahayana Buddhism and Shin Buddhism, this is one of the things that we could say it doesn't criticize early Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism, but it's that Mahayana Buddhism and Shin Buddhism it certainly puts an emphasis on this idea of interdependence. And so I think that's as you were saying in your first comment there. this understanding this, taking this interdependence to heart is really so critical right now with the state of our world and our divided nation, of course.
Right. We've got to. I think again we have done it before. The protests against the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement. We have come together as members of this nation and said this has got to change, and we have effected change by doing so. And I think we can continue to do that as we have. Again, looking at the Me Too movement and the changes that brought about, looking at the Black Lives Matter movement and the changes that brings about. There was a discussion recently about whether or not defund the police is a punitive term, and it may be, but transforming the police, changing the way they're taking some of the burden off of them and giving it to social workers, for example, to have social workers be the first responders to domestic situations rather than men and women with guns who are trained how to use them in a situation that looks to turn violent. We can begin to move, I think, in great ways. The way the Vietnam War protests did, the way the civil rights protests did, we can begin to move toward a better society. And we as Buddhists can be a part of that.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So let's see. Anybody that's with us live on Facebook, do you have any questions or comments for Greg? I don't know, Greg. Do you have your Facebook page open and the audio muted on Facebook?
The audio is muted. It's open, but it might just be better if you just read any questions that come up.
Okay. Well, I'll try to import the emotional content of these comments for you. So you, let's see. Let's see. Well, first of all, there's Trish says, "Thank you, Reverend Hata, for inviting Greg to speak to us. I missed his presentation on the 14th. Let's see. Any other comments for
Greg? You can get a copy, by the way. Copies are available. Just ask Reverend Peter to send you a copy.
Okay, yeah, there is a copy of that presentation. Actually, I'm going to be putting it on our YouTube channel, so it'll be there for you all to see. Well, if there are any other comments for Greg, I think maybe everyone's processing this overload of information that we've given them. But as I said to Reverend Fred last week, after about 5 minutes, I think we should maybe end it because we don't want to overstay our welcome. As considerate Buddhists, we should try to end it. But I want to thank, Mr. Greg Elliot for joining us today. This is wonderful to have him live, here, on a sort of a Q&A with me on our Sunday service. It really kind of obviously expands the sort of the significance of these teachings by showing, how, my view, but also Greg's view, and how this teaching has impacted us. So once again, I want to thank Greg very much for joining me and taking the time out to join us. Thank you, Greg.
My pleasure. Everybody stay safe.
Okay, so that was really interesting to have Greg join us there, yeah, if you'd like to see his presentation that he did for the Introducing Our Temple and Teachings, it should be on our YouTube channel shortly.